Biography, WWE Legends is just an awesome series. It's season 3, and this is a big one coming up. Sunday, April 9th on A&E. The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Classic. I got into pro wrestling as a kid watching Championship Wrestling from Florida with Gordon Soley, and Dusty Rhodes became larger than life as the American Dream under the tutelage of promoter Eddie Graham. What great times. The Briscoe brothers, Mike Graham, Steve Kern, and Dusty Rhodes leading the charge in the Sunshine State. And right here, Robert, you worked on this project, this amazing biop on the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Thank you for your time. First of all, talk about Dusty Rhodes, the man, Dusty Rhodes, the wrestler, and what you've learned from doing this project for A&E.
Hey, Jim. Well, thanks so much for having me, first of all. And I'll tell you, it makes me a little nervous to hear your introduction because I know how passionate Dusty fans are, and there's a lot of them. And it just I hope I did right by him, but more importantly by all of you guys, because his life is so interesting, and obviously he's an entertaining character, and he's a tremendous entertainer and talker, and the genius behind so much of what the business has become today. And but there's this third element about his connection to people and how he sort of not only entertains but inspires people. That's hard to describe, and it's hard to understand if you don't feel it. So we tried to do our best, and it was an honor and a privilege to get the chance to tell the story of his life.
I find it interesting in two regards, because you mentioned how obviously fans are so passionate, and with this whole WWE Legends series, fans know so much. And I'm just curious if you had any pro wrestling experience or knowledge background wise, because I also think it's good too when somebody doesn't know as much, because they're learning as they're going and they're piecing this all together. I think that's a cool element as well. And I'm just wondering where you land in that spectrum.
Well, I land on the far no, absolutely nothing end of the spectrum, which I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I have no choice. That's where I came to it. I mean, I was always familiar with wrestling. I came up, in a time, in the early 80s and in mid 80s when, the whole Hogan era, or as the yellow finger era, as Dusty would call it, and so I had familiarity with it, but I was never a huge wrestling fan. My family wasn't into wrestling, and I just didn't really know it. I didn't dislike it, or I didn't look down on it or anything, but I really didn't have a lot of knowledge for how it worked, and certainly the terminology every day was a learning curve for me. But one thing that I really quickly learned, two things about the industry that I really learned quickly was, number one, it's made up of people who care not just about their role, but they care about the industry as a whole more than any other industry I've worked in. And, I've dealt with politicians and athletes and all kinds of people over my years. And there's just an appreciation that everybody understands how important the fans are, how important the product is. They understand their role. That doesn't mean they're not people don't have feelings hurt and egos and all that stuff. Of course, that's like any business. But just this overall appreciation for the activity and the business, and to protect it and support it, to hold it up and to appreciate it and stay involved. I've never been involved in anything like that before, where there's just this mutual understanding about the respect for the activity, and Dusty is lived that to the core. And he passed it on to his kids, and he took it from people like Eddie Graham and Fritz von Erich, and but he lived it, and that was also something that I really wanted to show. And I felt like the best way to show that, at the end of the day, when we're all gone, what we're going to have to, show for ourselves in a lot of cases are our families and our kids and the next generation. I just felt like Dusty's kids, while, two completely almost sets of kids, 16 years apart and stuff, are so different. They share this common bond, as being his kids and experiencing him as a father. And so they really represent, what he stood for in every way, not only their commitment to wrestling and appreciation of the sports entertainment, but also as people, and warts and all. So we that's the tack that we took. And again, I hope you like it.
Robert, to even add to that, I also think too, when somebody is not per se a pro wrestling fan working on a project, it makes you work harder because you don't have that background or knowledge. We only know what we know as fans or people that are around it, but we still don't know all the whole story anyway. We just know what we know, that not going behind the curtain type of situation. We don't have that. So I think it lends itself to you having to do a little more. You have to do more in your research, and just because you're going in there just basically with nothing on the pages. So you're trying to create, let's see what story, what reality this is for us to do this. And I'm curious how long it took you to put this all together with the research and everything you were doing, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was, it was over a year, end to end of total work. And it started, in January of 2022, when I got the call, and, they were talking about this, group of episodes, and people were deciding who was going to be in it, and, who was going to direct what and when. And when I got the opportunity to do Dusty, I was like, great. I ordered his book, his biography, which I read, and it was great. And then the next thing that happened is, in conversations with people at the WWE and A&E, they said, I said, I'd really like to talk to his kids. And they're like, well, Dustin and Cody are with the AEW, and this is a WWE thing. And they said, just hold on. We'll send you Cody's number, and, you can reach out to him. We have a good relationship with him, but, he is at AEW, so we don't know if you'll be able to shoot with him. And like the weekend, to show my ignorance and all of this, like the weekend I reached out to him, it was like the weekend he left the AEW, and was like, trending on Twitter. It was just like a huge news, of which I didn't completely appreciate. And, I didn't hear back from him, and I was like, I don't understand. And then a few days later, I heard back from him, and now I knew a little more about what was going on. And, he was in this, place of limbo, and people hadn't really heard from him except for this cryptic Twitter message. And, so began my education about, wrestling history and wrestling current, and fast forward, 4 months later, and I was shooting with Cody as the, worst kept surprise in WrestleMania history, as he was, sequestered at WrestleMania. So it's been a lot of work, and it's been a year-long process of trying to not tell the same story that's been told, and maybe sacrifice some of those like iconic moments that you as a Dusty fan probably think have to be in there for the sake of some of these other things that went on with him, and his overall journey, which was great and a lot of fun.
There's a lot that could be in there. I mean, I was going to say, do you think there's going to be something streaming more about Dusty as far as what you all put together, because there was so much that you all learned? Is that something that happens where there can be an editor's cut or something like that, or that's not really talked about, or even doing a part 2?
I think some of the shows are the right amount of time, and some of them maybe, could use a little more content here and there. We could have done 2 more hours. I mean, you can sort of do a his life up to Jim Crockett Promotions and his life after Jim Crockett Promotions. That would be 2 totally different, very compelling films. those kind of decisions about what gets made and what happens for me is way above my pay grade. We went through a lot of cuts and a lot of different, iterations and ideas before we settled where we settled. But part of the decision that we made was a lot of the wrestling stuff is accessible and is online. And, you can listen to the podcast and you can sort of piece together this commonly held narrative about Dusty and the Dusty finish or the bionic elbow or whatever. And, I think the story that we tell is just a little bit different. I think it fills in some of the gaps and straightens out some of the narrative. And like with anything in wrestling, it'll probably create a little bit of controversy here and there, give people things to talk about. But I think at the end of the day, it's a celebration of Dusty, and it's a celebration of, one of the most powerful families in wrestling history.
It is amazing what he and the family has accomplished in this business, and not so much even with pro wrestling, even just what they were able to do behind the scenes and different things of bringing people together, races, creeds, colors. It's just an amazing story with Dusty. And I think part of that too, when I'm listening to your answer, how difficult, or was it difficult when you're just trying to edit and piece things together and say, okay, well, this we're not going to use, but we are going to use this. Is that even more challenging than actually talking to everybody and coming up with a plan?
It's really, really hard, because on one hand, you can only, I can only tell the stories from the interviews that I have. There's no narrator, there's no, we don't have the benefit of that. So, I can tell the stories based on the interviews that I did. But within that, there's so many different things to show. It's like if you were going to pick 45 seconds of footage or 2 minutes of footage to represent the Four Horsemen, you would be, it's impossible. That could be its own show. It should be its own show. And they had such a great rivalry. And, is that, how much of the Four Horsemen is his rivalry with Ric Flair? Like, I don't know, like you could argue a lot of different angles. So really, really difficult choices about, multiple people telling the same story, but slightly different, and like whose version is the best one. And then for me, the struggle as well is that I told this through his kids' eyes. So there's four, there's Dustin and Kristen, who were born in Austin. And then there's Teal and Cody, who were born in Georgia and Tampa. And they all have their own perspectives. So they all need to get the opportunity to tell their side of the story. So, the four of them, and then all the characters of wrestling, like lots of choices.
What an eclectic list too. This is going to be amazing. So Robert, who else can you tell us that you spoke to for this project? And I know there are many, but who comes to mind?
Sure. Well, we talked to all of the, traditional WWE documentary on Dusty Rhodes people, like Bruce Pritchard. We spoke with Hulk. We spoke with, Ric Flair. I was adamant about speaking with Magnum TA. We spoke to, there's so many. Hey, Tony.
How's it going?
What's going on, man?
Not too much. How you doing?
So good.
Tony, nice to see you. We're talking right now about who Robert and the team spoke to for this project, some of those involved in this. And thank you, Tony, for joining us. Yes, another big power, a big name for these Biography WWE Legends series, Tony. So go ahead, Robert, finish up and we'll get to Tony right and after that.
Yeah, so in terms of surprises, there are a few surprises that I sort of don't really want to unload, because there's people we spoke to who have never spoken about Dusty, who were very close to him, and I think that they provide not only a version you've never heard, and represent relationships that you don't really know anything about, but it's just sometimes it's nice to hear fresh voices and people who can fill out his personality, but also people who can fill out like his place in history. and how, you know, when you become an icon, it's not just from you know, winning titles and you know, having a great promo or, you know, winning championships or whatever. You need to have a lot of luck. You need to have luck about where you are when you get your opportunities, how you make those opportunities, how you respond in times of, you know, tragedy and times of celebration, the good times and the bad times. And so, you know, we tried to put a little perspective on that, on how Dusty reacted when he was in, you know, kind of critical moments in our country's history.
Yeah, critical moments in our country's history. It's so amazing where he was. I think of Dusty Rhodes, but I also think, listen, Muhammad Ali, the great one, another level. But I also think of Dusty in that realm as well, and what he was able to do, pop culture and just the times and everything. And Tony, I want to have you jump in because you've worked on a few of the Biography WWE Legends series projects. And if you could talk about, not in depth, just what projects you worked on, and then following up to my pop culture scenario there with Dusty.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough. This was my 4th bio that I was able to be a part of. I started back in 2019 with Roddy Piper, which was, you know, and Roddy is Roddy. I mean, that was an amazing one to be a part of. And then after that, we shifted to Shawn Michaels, obviously one of the GOATs in ring. And after that, we did Rey Mysterio, which Rey is a legend and going to the Hall of Fame this weekend, and just icon. I mean, that's an icon as well. And then Dusty, I really had no true knowledge of before going into this project. But after doing the research and diving into the interviews that Rob did, I mean, he is a legend. I mean, the first Starrcade in 1983, I mean, that kind of sets the tone for, you know, WrestleMania weekend and everything that's going on, from, you know, the concerts and the entertainment and just blowing out this event. It's I mean, without Dusty Rhodes, you know, would Vince have had the idea to do this big, grand, you know, event in an arena?
WrestleMania week is here, but as Tony mentions,
Yes.
Jade.
Okay.
It's so interesting. What do you guys, Tony, I want to address this with you because the ones you mentioned, unbelievable. And it lends itself that pro wrestlers like that, sports entertainers, whatever the category, Hulk Hogan, pop culture, Ric Flair. It's just amazing. Athletes, celebrities, fans are all into pro wrestling. Back then, now it's just amazing. And when you're coming into this, maybe not knowing all what you know, that's okay because you're learning. You're giving us some different perspective. I talked to Robert about this. And I think that's even better coming in when you don't know much, because you're really learning and putting a project together. What has it been like for you working on these projects and the pop culture side of it as well, that they've meant so much to society?
Right. So growing up, I was a huge wrestling fan, but that started sort of in the later 90s, sort of the Attitude Era. So going backwards in time and kind of researching and exploring, you know, some of these events and wrestlers that I really had no knowledge of. It was, like I said, it was learning, but I really enjoyed like learning to see how we got to where we are today. And I think that's what, you know, Dusty and Roddy were like the fathers of helping to get here today. You know, Roddy and Dusty both on the mic, their promo skills. And, you know, that resonates with pop culture, and outside of, you hear these promos and anybody can relate to those. I mean, it's incredible.
You know, Jim, I have to say real quick, one of the things that, you know, Dusty always did was he made sure that he had a good team around him, right? Like he took his guys, his booking committees, the Janie Angles and Magnum TAs, and, you know, he always believed that, you know, I want to try to have the ideas. I want to be, you know, I'm the American dream, you know, but he also leaned on the people that he trusted. And, heading out on this project, I would have been dead in the water without Tony, because what he brings, he brings wrestling, background and history, but he also brings an innate knowledge about the WWE, all the footage they've had, what's been out there, what's been seen, what people want to see, what, maybe hasn't been seen. I mean, we took a trip to PWI, Professional Wrestling Images, that was, I still think about it. The amount of images they have, the history of this sport. And, he walks around there like he owns the place. He's been there a dozen times, and the guys are all on a first name basis with him. He's like, check this folder out, check that folder out. And so, every call, and he can tell you about my panic calls to him an hour before interviews where I'm like, is this important? How important is this? Does this matter? And, couldn't do it without that bit of, support.
And again, that's the learning process, which I think is so cool when doing any of these projects. And so Biography, WWE Legends, The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, Sunday, April 9th on A&E. What has it been like working with WWE and I guess A&E? And is it more or less, here you go, open door, just whatever you need, whatever you want, go do your thing? Are there any restrictions involved? We don't have to go into details, but as well, when dealing with the companies and putting projects like this together?
No, so WWE pretty much opened up their vault, let's say, their library to us, and said, they start out with a large spreadsheet. The guys in their research department are amazing. Anything from matches to backstage interviews to interviews that they've done for other documentaries to you name it, any of the documentaries that they did themselves, so we could explore that footage within those, and then find reels that footage that they didn't use. So they literally opened up the door for us and were super, super helpful in that aspect. And anything that, we thought of, oh, does this exist? We asked them, and sure enough, within a couple hours, they give us a list of more elements. And so I think to our benefit, being able to have access to that library and in telling these stories, I mean, it's crucial. So for WWE and A&E to have that partnership and allow us, literally, we had everything that we ever would need, and it was amazing.
He brings up a great, the key word in there is partnership. A&E, which, on paper doesn't have a lot in common with WWE. And here they are, they've made this massive commitment, not just to their own selfish promotional interests, but to content that they think supports their brand and bringing an audience that they see as being valuable. And so, normally you're like, two big networks to deal with, and notes and comments and opinions. And they're more aligned than you would think. And what's nice is what they're aligned in are telling good stories. A&E wants to tell a true story, and WWE wants a story that's been different than, their 20 years of films that have been made. So it was a lot easier navigating that than I would have imagined. We also had the added benefit of three very good executive producers. Joe Lavine, who was, if you Google him, your computer might crash because the amount of Emmys will just clog up your internet connection. The guy's a television legend, and he was sort of oversaw Anthony and I. And then we had this guy, Cody Rhodes, who, he kind of has pretty good wrestling IQ and a lot of opinions. And then this other guy, Dustin, who is, by the way, a grandfather as of a couple of days ago, which is pretty amazing. Dusty's great grandchild is now on the earth. So let's digest that for a minute. But, again, sounds complicated trying to serve all these different people. But at the end of the day, everybody wanted to do the same thing, which was honor the legend. And so it worked out great.
And like Rob said, the key was to tell the best story. That was the most important thing. What has not been told before? The docs in the past have all been wrestling related, but with every one of these A&E docs, our goal is to kind of give you more, pull back the curtain, to what were they thinking, what was going on outside of the ring, outside of the arena, their families, their relationships with their friends, what was going on, not just the in-ring, you know, matches, wins and losses, the stories that, you know, what they were dealing with on a daily basis outside of the ring. And that's kind of what this series, you know, tried to get at.
Pro wrestling and just life in general, we can go through a roller coaster ride for any work, any personal lives. And I'm just curious, did you find that with Dusty, there were more highs, there were more happy times, more ups than there were the downs? Or was it pretty much consistently similar?
You know, I think one of the things about Dusty, for his charismatic and for his, you know, emotional and, you know, transparent as some of his promos were, you know, Hard Times or you know, I mean, there's so many, but where he's telling you the truth, right? And he's speaking truth. He was a pretty private person. You know, he's not a guy who, you know, he didn't have a lifelong drug problem that had him in and out of, you know, making good and bad decisions. He wasn't in the tabloid pages, you know, with this woman and that woman. When he left a company, he generally didn't talk shit about the company after he left. He was a very private guy, and I believe that he lived his life to a pretty rigid code about his conduct, about respect for other people. We can argue whether you thought he was a good booker or a good promo or the Dusty finish. Like those are opinions. Polka dots. He had a code. And we tried to just get underneath it a little bit and try to understand what we could. You know, I'd say the worst part about this whole thing is I never got to meet Dusty, you know, and pretty much everyone I shot with talked to him like, if you could have just like, he would have loved you. You would have loved. And it's but that's something that I understand. You know, my father is no longer here, and my wife never met my father, and my son will never meet my father. And so, you know, there's these things that tie us all together, and it doesn't matter if you follow wrestling or not.
Tony, do you want to expand on that too? And what are your thoughts about his journey? And if it was the highs and lows, was it pretty consistent or more highs than lows? I see as a fan, or even someone in media, but a fan, I see more highs than lows for someone like that. But you guys put this whole thing together.
No, I see his story as, you know, he always wanted to do things his way. He wanted to carve out his own path. And, you know, even there was a period where Vince had Dusty come up and do the matches with Billy Graham. And, you know, at the end of those, the Madison Square Garden sold out 3 times with Dusty Rhodes and Billy Graham in the main event. And Dusty literally had the opportunity to come work for Vince in New York. And what did Dusty say? No, I want to do things my way, and I want to be able to book and use, like Rob said, the people that I've worked with. And, you know, he utilized them in Jim Crockett promotions. He said no to the WWE, stayed down in the South, and, you know, he made Jim Crockett promotions explode. And he like I said, he didn't come to the WWE until, you know, his baby, you know, he did what he wanted to with that. And I just like that. I admire that. Just the way Cody, there's very similarities between Cody and Dusty in that, you know, they wanted to carve out their own path and make a name for themselves and do things differently. And you have to respect that.
Respect that indeed. It's so interesting. And now Cody getting that main event chance at WrestleMania for the title against Roman Reigns. That's so cool. And it's interesting too, because without going in depth or no Don Jardine alerts, you don't have to give anything away, but I'm curious too, in that facet, do you cover in this biop with Dusty and WWF, WWE, sort of like, there might be some animosity because Dusty didn't come when they called and he did his own thing. And then when he came up, he had to wear the polka dots, even though he just took it, ran with it, and made it great, even though it was a little silly. Is that part of this story? I don't want to go into the whole detail of anything, or is that something not really covered?
I don't think you could tell Dusty's story without trying to understand his relationship with Vince his family's, relationship with Vince. And, this is one of the fun things about wrestling. And most of these, Legends productions touch on it in some way, but I think we do it in a way that's kind of unique. And it's this idea of like, what's real and what's not. And I think in wrestling, the best stuff, the best conversations, the best moments are where, people can argue passionately on both sides of it. So when, Dusty is standing in the ring, talking to his son, Dustin, about what a bad father he was, you could say like, oh, it's wrestling, it's fake, but like, is it? And, when Dusty told Vince he's not coming to the WWE and he's staying at Jim Crockett Promotions, I mean, I wouldn't have taken that well if I were Vince.
Yeah, it's so interesting too. Another interesting aspect of all this is that you have all these different people that you're gathering to talk about Dusty. And again, not going into names or anything, but did you find that there might have been a couple like, I don't know if we could use that because I don't know if that person really knows that or is true or that information is different from others that we heard, and just trying to navigate all that part of it.
I mean, absolutely. There's, with time, legends grow and they change. And, I think that people remember things that they want to remember, or they don't remember things that they maybe subconsciously or consciously don't want to remember. And, that's the job of any storyteller, right? There's the truth, which might be a gray area, depending on someone's perspective. And then there's people maybe trying to execute some kind of agenda. And so our hackles were up on that. And what we try to do is represent Dusty, warts and all, but fairly.
Tony and Robert, was Dusty a very big sports athlete? Was he into the baseball and the football? I believe I read his dad, maybe even his autobiography, his dad, I think, was a big baseball fan. And then Dusty, I believe, played at West Texas State. But I don't know how far back you go into this. Do we go back into his upbringing and growing up?
Yeah, no, we touched early on. He was a multi-sport athlete, baseball, football. He had a tryout with the Mets in spring training. He played for a Connecticut football league?
Continental Football League. The Hartford Charter Oaks were, part of the Continental Football League, and Dusty played. That was professional football at the time. And this, you bring up a great point, Jim. There's debate about whether Dusty actually played at West Texas State. There's like photos of him there, and his name is on the rolls, but there's some debate. And I think Ted DiBiase is one of these guys who's like, he definitely played. I played with him. And then there's other people who are like, no, he's not. His family thinks he never played any sport there. So one of these things that part of the legend, but when you get down to it, he spent a very short time at West Texas State. Nobody's sure exactly how long, why he left as early as he did, but there's only one photo of him there, and he's wearing a suit, not a football uniform.
And that's what I love about these biopics is when you're and it still makes you question, okay, so what is part of the real story and what is part of maybe the shtick of what's going on in the legend as it goes and all. And another thing too is, do you touch base about the coming up of the Dusty Rhodes name? Because I believe there was a baseball player too way back that also went by the name of Dusty Rhodes. And I don't know if you guys touched on and again, you don't have to go in detail. I'm just asking if you touched on how they came up. I know with the American Dream, because that was birthed Championship Wrestling from Florida with promoter Eddie Graham. And when he turned on Pac Song, The Claw, and did all that and became the American Dream, which was fun down here. But I'm just curious about the name.
We did not dig deep into the name. His name is is so nobody knows him as Virgil. He was never known as Virgil. He's been Dusty Rhodes. And whether it was his dad or whether it was Fritz von Erich or whether it was, some kid down the street, it didn't matter to us. From the beginning of the movie, he starts as Virgil, but he quickly becomes Dusty, and we never look back from that.
Tony, is there much difference between Virgil and Dusty Rhodes in talking with the different ones that Robert or you or the team spoke to, all the talent? I know Robert did mention he was pretty much a private person with his private life, but I'm curious as far as the personality of the man. Did you find that there may have been a Dusty Rhodes and then there also was a Virgil Runnels?
No, I think like anyone, he was a family man. I mean, that I don't know how much that came across, early in his life, like in the ring and whatnot, but he was a family man behind the scenes. And you'll learn that throughout the documentary that, he loved his kids. He loved his children. He loved his wife. And yeah, he was big family man. And none of his kids would argue otherwise.
And Robert, might we see $6 Million Man footage on this for some reason?
$6 Million Man footage. I only got 4 million. What'd you get?
I'm getting bionic elbow thoughts here. Because of the bionic elbow, we can rebuild him. We could make him bionic.
Awesome.
I'm going to take that as a no.
No $6 Million Man footage, but I love the opening of that show. It was one of the all-time great television openings.
And then just how the slow motion.
Totally.
Oh, guys, I want to thank you so much for sharing some insight. And Robert and Tony, I want you both to have the last word. And I'll have Tony go first about being a part of Biography, WWE Legends, and especially the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, Sunday, April 9th on A&E.
Yeah, wrestling fans for sure, and non-wrestling fans. I just think it's a wonderful story on the life of a great man. He had such a huge impact, like we said, on WrestleMania this weekend wouldn't be what it is without his creative input on making things bigger, extravagant. You got to sell the event, and make people want to come see it and watch it. So I think think his story is similar, and I think most people will enjoy this one.
Yeah, I would.
Robert, I want to say this too before we let you go and have your last word. That another amazing aspect of Dusty as far as in-ring career, because he did so much behind the scenes too, as we know, and it's just so amazing. But this is amazing to me because I want to mention this too. At one time, he was in the top 10. Now, this is when the territory days were going on. He was in the top 10 of the AEW, the WWF or WWF, which is now WWE, and the NWA. He was in the top 10 for world title shots. And he was doing things as a pro wrestler that others weren't doing as much in the States, traveling from these different territory promotions and world title matches, to me was also an incredible part of his story. I know there's so much that can be touched on, but I wanted to mention that, but I also obviously want to give you last word on all this.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having us, Jim. It's really, I think that's the number one thing. We got access to all of Dusty's booking journals, which were incredible. The amount of days that they were on the road, the detailed expenses, $9 for gas, $11 for fried chicken, and then the house total in Wilmington, in Minneapolis, how many people's tickets sold, what the card was, all through the 70s, all through the 80s. And it showed, what it showed was Dusty's dedication to the business and his commitment to the business. And I think that as you watch WrestleMania, this year especially, you have to understand that everybody who participates, whether it's Vince and Stephanie or Cody and Roman Reigns, like these people have a dedication and a commitment to the business that is second to none. And the stories are real. The sport, the championships, the booking, of course it's entertainment, but the stories are real. So Cody Rhodes stepping into the ring at WrestleMania. He steps in with the legacy of his father. He steps in with the legacy of Goldust. He steps in with the weight of AEW. That's all real. And yeah, they might be leaning into it and they might be building it up, but it's real. And that's the way Dusty would have wanted it.
Not to mention Roman Reigns was one of Dusty Rhodes' proteges in NXT, which is crazy. So,
guys, it makes the promos that they're doing to build this up with the great Paul Heyman, who's unbelievable on the microphone, guys, too. It adds that realism to it, which is so unique and interesting. It makes it really gets to your heart a little more. And I know I said I'd give you both the last word, and I did, but you mentioned something, I have to bring it up. So you mentioned the booking sheets and all, and it really goes in depth. So I'm wondering, was Budweiser part of those sheets?
36 beers every road trip. That's what Magnum TA said. So,
guys, thank you both so much. Robert, Tony, all your work. Biography, WWE Legends. What a great series. Season 3. And we get the American Dream Dusty Rhodes Sunday, April 9th on A&E. And I'll end it with this, guys. So long from the Sunshine State.
thank you.
thank you.